Let's find out what our analysts think. Greg Simmons, author and researcher, Uppsala, Sweden, joins us. We also have Don DeBar, who's an activist and commentator, joining us from Ossining in New York. Okay, gentlemen, welcome to you both. Let me first start with you, if I may. Greg, when you take a look at the resolution, there's obviously one camp that says the U.S. is looking for any reasons to fan the flames when it comes to China and to smear it, basically. Of course, the other camp saying, no, the U.S. is completely within its right. What do you think of it? Which camp are you in?
Well, I mean, it's pretty clear what they're trying to do at the moment is to create a moral panic. And the focus of this moral panic, the supposed threat being China. And this is a means to try and draw public attention away from the disasters which are around the Biden administration and the US in general, and to unite the public, which is very split. So, I mean, this is a move of desperation. And of course, this is also to do with the changing geopolitical landscape. I mean, the US is a very clearly declining hegemon, and China is the main rising alternative to the US. So it's a threat in many ways, but it's also a distraction.
Don DeBar, what do you think? I mean, at this point, obviously China is not happy about this resolution that was passed. Even prior, it did come out and pretty much said that the U.S. is overreacting to this. Is the U.S. overreacting?
Well, you're talking about the U.S. Congress, first of all. It's important to note that foreign policy is the exclusive domain of the executive branch, in other words, the president. So Congress has no business even doing this. I'll go back to 2018 when President Trump, then President Trump, had scheduled and ended up having a summit with President Putin of the Russian Federation in Helsinki. And there was the possibility that there would be a rollback of sanctions by the U.S. against Russia. And in addition to that, Trump had been negotiating with the DPRK, with North Korea, and there was a possibility of a rollback of sanctions there, all of which implied the possibility of a rollback of sanctions with Iran when Trump got around to that. The Congress, on its own initiative, passed a law basically increasing the sanctions on each of those three nations, and it was passed by a vote of 517, I think, out of a possible 535 votes in the two houses. So, in other words, not only veto-proof, but nearly unanimous. What can you say? First of all, Congress is supposed to be under the Constitution, but it is not the expression of democratic will of the people here. Their polling data going back to the early 90s hovers between 8 and 20% positive, and yet they have a re-election rate of almost 99%. So this is not something that's actually a product of the will of the people here. In addition to that, you have to ask yourself if genocidal sociopathy can be considered a mental illness, then they have to be considered crazy. Because in the face of avoiding the war that we're now having with Russia, or the possibility of it, they were almost unanimously opposed to any steps in that direction.
Well, this whole balloon thing really, to me, is mind-boggling, because one of the things that obviously Greg Simmons comes to mind here is how can you have balloons that the U.S. says has been going on for quite some time in terms of the numbers intruding onto either the American airspace or the Canadian airspace. How does it make it into the airspace in the first place? And then for it not to have been made a big deal prior, and now, of course, it is a big deal. China has said in reaction also that the U.S. intrudes in other people's affairs, other countries' affairs. It spies on other countries. If you recall, when the news came out that in conjunction with or in cooperation with Danish authorities, the U.S. spied on the former German Chancellor Angela Merkel. So there's a case of double standards here also, isn't it?
Oh, it's more than double standards. I mean, by their own admission, this balloon, weather balloon, was released in Hainan, and according to weather conditions which were very specific, brought it over the US. But what is important is the timing and the nature of the news, because this is distracting. I mean, you've got about 30 odd kilometres of burning train in Ohio, when all they're talking about is a balloon. You've got a war out of control, which they're getting increasingly involved in Ukraine, and you're getting all of these other things. So, I mean, this is very much a distraction. And if we want to look at the double standards, it's well beyond that. I mean, let's not forget American troops are occupying 30% of Syria and they're stealing oil and grain. And I mean, if they're talking about sending objects flying to other airspace, if we remember a couple of years back, they sent a drone over a civilian airport, Baghdad, to murder General Soleimani.
Don DeBar, in conclusion here, what are we seeing in terms of, at least one, what a guest there said, if I made it out clearly, are we going to see the U.S. take this up a notch? And what would that be if it plans to do so?
Well, I mean, across the board. First, I think the American people are being psychologically prepared for war, for aerial invasion, in essence. These first, shoot downs, in essence, remind people that the air is above us and that there could be dangerous things up there that the government must protect us from. I remind people, of course, that the only time the United States has ever suffered an attack from the air was on September 11th, and the air defenses of the United States that at that point had consumed maybe $5 trillion after World War II were completely useless. And shooting down balloons and chest thumping in front of the media really has maybe some psychological value. And I think also the value it has is to announce yet another program of air defenses that are going to cost $1 trillion and help sell that to the people here. But the real thing I'm afraid of is while they're doing this, they're also trying to sell the idea of air defenses, quote unquote, over Ukraine. In other words, an area war with Russia next to Russia's borders. And that is a much more dangerous proposition.
I'm still having a hard time understanding how a balloon crosses in when they want to sell a missile defense shield. Okay, forget it. We'll leave it there. Greg Simmons, author and researcher from Uppsala, Sweden. Thank you for your comments. Don DeBar, activist and commentator from Austin, New York. Thank you. And with that, we come to an end for this edition of the News Review. Thanks for tuning in.